going on, everybody? Nick Whalen, Jeff Erickson here with you. It's the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, Tuesday, August 26th. Jeff, if my math is correct, I'm on the record. You know I'm not a math guy. We are 9 days away from the start of NFL Week 1. A bunch of news flowing in. It's cut-down day as we record this on Tuesday. We got some other big signings, some big news out of Las Vegas, a quarterback decision, the decision that we've been waiting on out of New Orleans. We'll hit all of that, and we'll talk about some risers and fallers, whether or not we're paying the price on guys who have notably seen their prices go up or down over the last couple of months. Before all that, we are brought to you, as always, by the Circa Resort and Casino out in Las Vegas. Circa Million, Circa Survivor, they're back with a massive $21 million in guaranteed prizes. Circa Million, you pick 5 games against the spread each week, 18 weeks of action with 126 ways to win. $1 million goes to the winner, $6 million guaranteed. The Circa Survivor, you know how it works. You make one pick per week, no point spread, last the longest to win it all, at least $15 million guaranteed in that one. Enter in Nevada, play from anywhere, $21 million up for grabs. Visit circasports.com for details. Jeff, you and I, last time we chatted on this podcast, were out at Circa live in Vegas last week. Since that pod, I know you have entered Survivor and I've entered Million. So we've already covered our bases here.
Yeah, we have. Excited about that. I even made a video on who I'm likely to take in week 1. Hey, I'm not binding, but right now, still leaning Denver Broncos going against a rookie quarterback at home in his first start. So against the Tennessee Titans. So we'll see about that. You suggested maybe Arizona would be a good candidate in week 1 at the New Orleans Saints. They announced their quarterback decision today. The Rattler, Spencer Rattler, getting the start over Tyler Shuck. I'm not really terribly surprised by this. I'm also not terribly enthused by this.
This is exactly, I think, how we expected this to play out for the last few weeks when, it feels like the Saints gave Tyler Shuck every opportunity to try to win this job. He got off to a bad start in camp and, looked better, I thought, over the last 2 preseason games. But there wasn't a whole lot of like, oh, you got to go watch that Tyler Shuck highlight, or here's a 3-minute compilation of Tyler Shuck throwing lasers in the preseason. I think given the level of investment, given Tyler Shuck's age, how long he was in college, the ideal scenario is that he would start at some point this year and you at least get 1 season, even if that's all it is, to prove whether or not he belongs, because I think the Saints are going to be in the quarterback market again in the 2026 NFL draft. But all due respect to Spencer Rattler, he was a big-time recruit at one point in his life, Jeff. That was a long time ago. If you're a second-round pick, an older second-round pick with experience, and you can't win this job, that says a lot, I think, about how the Saints are feeling about that second-round investment right now.
So it's Brandon Weeden, except at a lower price. That's the way I've
Pretty
always
much.
kind of
Slightly lower price
addressed this here. The Saints, the one thing I do like is they drafted a good offensive lineman, Kelvin Banks, in the first round. They got Eric McCoy back. There's a pretty strong through line about, when McCoy was hurt last year and the Saints offense struggling quite a bit. And of course, then they lost every pass catcher after that. But McCoy got hurt in game 3 against the Eagles, and that was a big, big drop off there. So my question to you is, independent of even this QB decision, are there any Saints you drafting? Are you staying away, just completely away from Kamara, from Olave, from Rashid Shaheed, or even Juwan Johnson because of the quarterback situation? Are you drafting any of them?
Juwan Johnson on my do not draft list this year. No, man, Kamara and Olave to me are kind of in the same category where I'm not totally out, and as we always say, there's a price at which you'll take any player. It's just, I want to be insulated from having to take them, if that makes sense. I don't want to get to pick 50 and feel like, oh no, I only have 1 running back. I have to take Alvin Kamara here. I want to protect against that. And that's why I've been taking, a lot of James Cook, a decent amount of Kyron Williams. If I go early running back, it's like, I just want to get that squared away so I don't have to shop in that Alvin Kamara, Chuba Hubbard, James Conner, RJ Harvey zone. And honestly, if anything, I would rather just wait another round to take Isaiah Pacheco or take Tony Pollard, somebody I feel better about. David Montgomery, Jordan Mason later in the draft. We're seeing Zach Charbonnet, by the way, creep his way into the mid-80s. So we're still talking a couple rounds behind Alvin Kamara, but I think there's still going to be a reasonable floor with Kamara week to week. I don't think that ceiling that's been there in years past is going to be quite as reachable. And again, same thing goes for Olave. Like if he's there, if I don't like any other options, you can sell yourself on the upside. I like the player. I hate the situation. I hate the injury risk. I don't think this team's going to be all that competitive. I guess with both of those guys, you could spin it as, all right, if the Saints are as bad as I think they're going to be, maybe they will be passing a ton. They'll be playing a lot of catch up. Even with Kamara, who obviously is a running back, you're almost more worried about the receiving than you are the rushing.
Yeah. I have one league with Kamara in it. And that was the RotoWire Stake League, which is kind of, an important league for me. Yeah. But I'm more concerned about avoiding the Chris Olave zone at wide receiver than I am at the running backs now. That we've talked last week, like, what if we're wrong about the running back dead zone?
Yeah,
a little bit. The more I dig into it, the more I think a wide receiver dead zone exists, and Olave is right at the start of that. There, wide receiver 37 in the last week or so over at the NFFC. That's pick, that's around pick 70. Jacoby Meyers, we'll talk about him momentarily. Deebo Samuel, Matthew Golden, Stephon Diggs, the suspended Jordan Addison, the injured and holding out Juwan Jennings, or holding in Khalil Shakir, Cooper Kupp. And that's about a range of about 20 picks. I don't mind necessarily taking one of those receivers. I'd far prefer it to be my flex spot than to be one of my top 3 receivers. I want to make sure I have 3 receivers before I get to that spot. I think that's one of the takeaways I'm running into when I do when I do my draft builds. I'm finding that to be more and more important.
Yeah, and I think it's attainable to have 2 running backs and 3 receivers before you get there. I mean, you have to stay disciplined. You can't go early quarterback and early tight end and then say, oh, I don't want to have to draft Kamara and I don't want to have to shop in that tier of receivers. I think I'm a little more open to that tier than you are. Obviously we'll talk about Meyers in a moment. I was very in on him. I was coming around on Deebo Samuel, although with McLaurin now locked up, I think we kind of go back to status quo with him. Matthew Golden inside the top 80, sometimes the top 75. That's getting a little scary, right? Yeah. I like that a lot more when you could get him at like pick 105. He's been pushed into kind of an uncomfortable spot. And then, Stephon Diggs is still kind of the lottery ticket guy to me. But the fact that I'm saying that about a guy in his 30s coming off a major injury, there are certainly red flags with all those guys. I think you're right to call that kind of the mini dead zone.
Yeah. So again, I will take one of those as my flex if possible. I really don't want it being one of my top 3 receivers that I'm playing week in and week out. I want to have options. So when I get to that point in time.
All right, let's talk Raiders here. This has been a tough 24 hours here on Jakobi Meyers Island. Not only has Jakobi Meyers apparently requested a trade, he wants a new contract. The Raiders said kick rocks. That's not going to happen. He is set to make just under $15 million this year, but there's nothing guaranteed beyond 2025. So I guess understandable if you're Jakobi Meyers that you would want a new deal. Not sure why you would raise this publicly 9 days before the NFL season starts. Not a whole lot of time to hammer something out. Coincidence or not, the Raiders also signed Amari Cooper yesterday.
Yeah, I asked you whether that's coincidence or causation. I think it's coincidence. I actually think they probably were talking with him anyhow, is my guess. Maybe that was just the final straw. I think what really happened is that, that Meyers was kind of trying to do this on the down low, not be a distraction in camp, go through it, trying to be the professional, and he was rebuffed. I think they were talking maybe about some sort of deal, just couldn't get anything done. That's the read I'm getting from the reports I've seen in this story. I have some Meyers, and I like you. I liked him as a not a whole lot else in camp sort of situation going on there. But it's also a team that I don't expect a ton of volume. Pete Carroll is a running head coach. Chip Kelly is known more for his designing his run offenses than his pass offenses.
Right.
The theory of the case for Jakobi Meyers is Blake Bowers is getting his targets. Ashton Genty is going to get some out of the backfield, but they truly didn't have too many pass catching options in the wide receiver room. If there's any sort of threat about him not playing week 1, of course, this hurts him quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think these last few days and last few weeks have probably taught us that it's more likely than not that guys are not going to be sacrificing game checks, and whether or not they work out something contract wise or he just kind of backs down and plays out the year. I think that's the most likely scenario. But either way, you have Amari Cooper now encroaching on that workload, and like you said, so much of the appeal, at least for me, with Jakobi Meyers was just the lack of competition. Putting up the season that he did while Brock Bowers had an all-time year at tight end, I think almost made me more encouraged. The Raiders did draft a couple of receivers in Dante Thornton and Jack Besh. Seems like Thornton's a little bit further along. He's the guy they're more excited about. At the same time, bringing in Amari Cooper, that's going to block both of those rookies. So that tells me that maybe as excited as they are about Dante Thornton long term, maybe they don't feel like he's ready right away. I was actually surprised. We haven't heard anything on Amari Cooper in forever, and all of a sudden, we get this report that he's signing. Other teams were interested. I guess we could talk about this from a Meyers perspective, which we have, but do you have any interest in Amari Cooper? Is this kind of a Keenan Allen 2.0 situation?
No, I don't think so. I think Keenan Allen did a better job of getting some separation last year with the Bears. Maybe not great, but Cooper looked terrible on the Bills, and maybe that was joining a midseason, a new team midseason. I think that might be part of the issue there. I just, Cooper, he's probably worked out well enough to get signed, but how quickly can he ramp up with a new team, new organization, new playbook, and be any sort of factor? Cooper's not, it has to be the notorious Alan Seslowsky 30-man roster dynasty leagues for me to be having a share of Cooper at this point in time. It doesn't really change what I'm doing with Meyers that much. I think Meyers gets done, by the way. Either he gets done or he resigns. It's interesting. There's some, I know, because it's Twitter, I saw banter about maybe the Niners and Raiders, you trade my problem for your problem sort of thing with Juwan Jennings for Meyers. Do you realize with Juwan Jennings, he held out last year too?
Oh, yeah.
I forgot about that. It's something I was reading about there.
I kind of like that strategy. I'll just hold out every year and just, hopefully they'll keep bumping up my salary if I play well. I mean, Amari Cooper is only 31 and he just turned 31 a month ago. I would have guessed that he was older than that. It certainly felt like he was more washed by the end of that Buffalo season last year, but that was just a weird year in general for Bills wide receivers. I don't really know how much of that to hold against Amari Cooper specifically. There were a couple games where it felt like he made an impact, and then for the most part was just a disappearing act down the stretch. But he has familiarity with the Raiders organization, even though it's a completely different regime from the last time he was there. I would imagine that was at least part of the decision. And look, if you're Amari Cooper, you're looking for touches, you're looking for targets. And I think that's probably part of the reason you chose the Raiders as well, is he knows what we know about Jakobi Meyers, is that he's kind of the only show in town.
Exactly.
All right, let's talk a little Joe Mixon, Jeff, before we get to our risers and fallers. It felt like the writing was on the wall for Joe Mixon to miss some time to begin the year. We now know he'll miss at least the first 4 games. DeMeco Ryans had been extremely cagey about this in recent days. Even declined to talk about it yesterday, and then all of a sudden, here's Joe Mixon out for the first 4 games of the year. You and I had a very long talk about this on Sirius XM this morning. And I think we hit it from just about every angle, and we really just settled on I don't know if I want a part of any of these backs now in Houston, because there's not an obvious pivot. If you want to say Nick Chubb is the closest thing to it, sure, but you still have Daria Gumbawale, you have Damian Pierce, you have Woody Marks, who's going to get some pass catching work. And again, the way DeMeco Ryans has talked about this, it doesn't look like they're leaning toward any one guy. I think this could be a full-on committee.
It could be, and it's this offensive line is a real problem. I think the back I have the most interest in is Woody Marks, because he might be a pass catcher. Nick Chubb has never been the pass catching type of back. He can, we saw it at Georgia, but not too much in the pros. And we didn't really see a whole lot out of Chubb anyhow last year when he came back. And maybe a full off season helps him, but I'm not convinced yet. So, but I will say this, as Chubb, even in the last week, has been pretty affordable. Running back 51. High of 87, I would never do that, but a range of 87 to 180, pretty wide range at that point. That's 77 drafts we're talking about here. I'm still not in love with that, though. I still don't think it's great. I have one exposure to Mixon. That'll be enough for me. I will not have any more. So now it's just a case of like trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? If I'm going to pay, take a flyer late on Woody Marks, basically. That's when we're talking 20, like the NFFC has 20-man rosters. All 3 of those would get drafted. Heck, Pierce might even get drafted. God forbid. Sure. But I think we've seen how that movie ends. I'd rather take a chance on on Chris Rodriguez, for instance, over those guys. I'd rather take a chance on Keaton Mitchell, to be honest with you. DJ Giddens, the backup for Jonathan Taylor on the Colts. At least then you're looking at teams that might have a better situation offensively if they do get the job. I'd definitely rather take Ollie Gordon. Ollie Gordon's going to start to be more expensive, I think, especially with the news on Jalen Wright, and especially we don't know what we're going to get out of Devin Achane early on in the season. That's one of the guys I'd much rather take than any of these other backs on Houston.
I mean, we're also talking about what might be on paper the worst offensive line in football. It's like this.
Yeah.
Like, yes, if this breaks right, let's say you take Nick Chubb at pick, I don't know, 130, and he does emerge as something of a number one for the first 5 or 6 games of the year. Like, what is the ultimate upside there? I think targeting some of those higher end handcuffs that could really, really pay dividends if that starter goes down, to me, is still probably worth it. And again, we're talking about the, let's say, 120 to 160 range where you're drafting these guys. Like, you're not at that point in the draft, you're not necessarily looking for somebody who can just, get you 8 points if you absolutely need them. It's like, especially to begin the year with Joe Mixon out, in theory, you haven't drafted enough injured players that you need to be starting the player that you're taking with the 130th overall pick. So like, I would rather play for the late season or mid season upside than I would, the quote unquote floor play early on. All right, Before we get to risers and fallers, we got a message from our friends over at Renegade Fantasy. Fantasy football players, aren't you done watching your season crumble because of injuries or underperforming players? You can join the RotoWire League right now over on Renegade Fantasy, the only app that lets you substitute players in real time. Go to rotowire.renegadefantasy.com and hit the join button right now. With Renegade, you're not just the GM, you're also the coach. No more losing Sundays, no more lost points. You call the shots, you make the moves, you win the league. Step out of the luxury box and onto the field. This is fantasy football without limits. It's Renegade Fantasy. Join the RotoWire League today and win. Again, check out rotowire.renegadefantasy.com and join the league today. All right, Jeff, risers and fallers. We will, of course, be comparing ADPs from really whatever range you want. I'm not going to put parameters on this. We could go all the way back to June and July. We could talk about guys who are up and down just in the last few weeks. But, contrary to what we've done in recent weeks, where we're kind of making our own lists of players and, guys we like, guys we're avoiding, this is more so, kind of an exercise in, are you paying the updated price on some players who've seen some serious movement? So I got a few guys I want to hit. I'm sure you have some as well, but I will let you start it off. You could throw a player my way. I will tell you if I'm in or out.
All right. Are you paying the bill on Jacory Croskey-Merritt?
Well, I mean, it's fitting, I think, that we start with him, right? Because there's maybe not been a bigger riser in terms of somebody who was not even on the radar for a lot of people 3 weeks ago, who is now going on average inside the top 100 in the last week at the NFFC. He's gone as high as 61. He has gone as late as 129 in the last 82 drafts. So that's a pretty representative sample. We'll say, am I paying the price at pick 95? I don't know if I am, Jeff. I don't know if I am, because I'm still concerned that this is not going to be his backfield. Yes, you get rid of Brian Robinson. That solves one minor problem, but they still have 3 other running backs who are getting work for this team last year. You have Eckler, you have McNichols, you have Chris Rodriguez. I would be very surprised if they just hand this job to Jacory Croskey-Merritt. I think that's kind of misreading the Brian Robinson situation to think, oh, they got their guy. They'll just trade Brian Robinson. They don't need him. I think they're okay with the committee approach. All these guys kind of bring different things to the table, including Croskey-Merritt. I think there will be some value there, but man, I inside the top 100, Jeff, I'm not quite willing to get there. I mean, he's only going on average like 6 picks behind Jordan Mason. He's not that far behind Jalen Warren, Zach Charbonnet. I mean, I hate to say it, but even like Javonte Williams going around later than him, I might consider that.
Yeah, I might also. I want to believe in Bill. I really do. I really want to, but I agree. The too many mouths to feed argument holds a lot of sway for me right now. I also worry a little bit about the Washington offensive line. I think we all got excited seeing what they did against the Bengals, but that's the Bengals without Trey Hendrickson out there. Now, Hendrickson's not the best run stuffer, so maybe that's not even as relevant as we think it is. But Washington is going to have a harder schedule this year. They had a historically easy schedule last year. Offensive line, Sam Cosmi, not going to be ready for the start of the season. Probably. Dan Quinn won't close the door on that. They're still on the table. We'll see. Josh Connerly is almost certainly going to end up starting at right tackle. I know it's kind of him or Andrew Wiley, but let's face it, Connerly's looked pretty good so far. They did trade for the Texans' Laramie Tunsil. That was interesting. Discussing both the Texans and the Commanders there, but it's the diversification of roles that happens on this Commanders team. I mean, maybe it's just Bill and Eckler, and if that's the case, and it's a 2-headed monster instead of a 3-headed monster, then it's probably worth it at the price.
All right, I'll toss you a running back as well, Jeff. This is not somebody who's risen 150 spots in the last 3 weeks like Bill has, but it is in fact a faller and somebody who over the last month has fallen a full round at the NFFC. What are we doing with Breece Hall now going closer to pick 45, whereas you might have had to take him inside the top 30 or 35 a month ago?
Probably taking him on at that price, especially if I don't have my second running back at that point in time. Here's the thing. I don't think there's a degradation of skills for Breece Hall. I think he's a different type of back than Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis, who's banged up right now anyhow. I think the overall concern about the Jets offense has dragged Hall down just as much as the timeshare considerations. Hall is the only real pass catcher in that running back grouping there. In a PPR league, I think he's fine at that 3-4 turn, and that's where we're getting him. I get shut out and all these rising running backs that we're going to talk about. I've got a couple on my list, but if we get shut out on those guys, if James Cook is gone, because at one point Cook was going around that range and now he's not, I think. But if he's gone, if Hampton's gone, if Henderson's gone, and I need a running back, yeah, I want to go Hall over Kenneth Walker. I guess that's the comparison now. Walker actually goes a little bit ahead of Hall right now. I'm going to go Hall. I'm less concerned about his timeshare concerns than I am Walker's. And honestly, I'm less concerned about the health. I think the offensive line might be a wash in terms of that discussion right now, but I think ultimately the Jets will probably be better off.
I think that's fair. I wasn't necessarily in on the initial cost of Breece Hall. I thought there were better options, going slightly ahead of him. I wanted to make sure I was shopping in that tier, but he's moved far beyond now the Bucky Irving, Chase Brown, Achane, Taylor, Josh Jacobs tier. Like there was a time where he was just behind that group, and there's massive separation now, almost 2 rounds between some of those guys and Breece Hall. So he's now the cutoff. He's kind of the stopgap before that group of running backs that we talked about with Kamara, right? It's like if you need a second running back and you don't want Breece Hall and you don't want Kenneth Walker, okay, well then you're staring at Kamara, you're staring at Hubbard, you're staring at James Conner, which some people are into. I would still rather roll the dice on Breece Hall at that point.
Yeah, I would too. I will say Hubbard is ironically priced in the dead zone because I don't think he's dead. I think he's relatively safe. He might be your bailout if you get stuck missing out on some other running backs in that range. They paid him. They have a good run blocking offensive line. I think that there'll be plenty of production. The one thing about Hubbard is they did bring in competition. Rico Dowdle has a similar skill set.
Yeah, that
is a worrying point to a certain extent, and maybe that manifests itself in passing downs where I don't think Chuba Hubbard was all that good at doing in terms of he caught a lot of passes, didn't do much with them. There, but I still think Chuba Hubbard is a little bit underpriced as far as that all goes. But yeah, I take Breece Hall over him still and feel pretty good about that. All right, Nick, we did a couple of running backs. Let's go to wide receiver. And I'm a positive, shiny, happy guy, so I'm going to give you another riser. That is Emeka Egbuka on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is a guy that has garnered nothing but praise since the start of training camp.
Yeah, he's up over 2 rounds in the last month. And, some of that data, I think he's going to continue to rise. The data that I'm looking at is from a couple of days ago. And, it still feels like when you jump in a draft, you're always a little bit shocked, how early he's going. Gone as early as 37 in the last week at the NFFC. It's gone as late as the early 80s. Congratulations if you're getting Egbuka in the 70s or 80s right now, because the ADP is now settled in the late 50s. He has leapfrogged guys like Zay Flowers, Jalen Waddle, Rashee Rice, Ricky Pearsall. Jeff, this is so tough for me because it conflicts with my Chris Godwin love. And I've had to completely walk back that take. I was totally wrong. I was too optimistic on the timetable for Chris Godwin. Now it's looking like it's going to be Evans and Egbuka for at least the first 3 or 4 games of the season. Jalen McMillan, of course, probably out till midseason. Godwin, they're kind of going to take it game by game. I am still of the belief that Chris Godwin is going to command a ton of targets. He's going to have a big role once he's back. It's just a question of how long does that take? How long does he need to ramp up? Does he look like the guy that he was last season? Again, I think he will. Can Egbuka play well enough in the first 3 or 4 games of the year that he just absolutely has to be out there almost at the expense of Godwin or Evans. And they'll run, plenty of 3 wide receiver sets. In theory, all those guys, should be able to eat, but not all 3 of them are going to put up, top 30, top 40 wide receiver seasons on a per game basis. You could probably sustain 2 of those guys, and then somebody's going to have to take a hit. I'm a little skeptical on Mike Evans. I don't know that you could count on him to make it through the season, much like he did not last year. He's adding, yet another year, more tread off those tires. I think this will kind of find a way to almost work itself out like it did last year, where you had guys kind of plugging in, somebody goes down for a few weeks, somebody else steps up. Like, that's kind of why the Buccaneers have built this roster the way that they have. When it comes down to it, am I taking Emeka Egbuka over Zay Flowers? Am I taking him over Waddle? I think I'm actually okay with it. I think I am, partially because of the names that we're comparing him to, right? Like, he's still going after all of the guys that I'm like, all right, I can't go that far. But I'm not huge on Zay Flowers. There's a ton of risk with Jalen Waddle. There's obviously a ton of risk with Rashee Rice. Ricky Pearsall is interesting. He goes about 4 picks later. To me, that's kind of an eye of the beholder type of pick. And then you're into Jerry Jeudy, Travis Hunter, Chris Olave. To me, the price is still shocking, considering that a month ago, I thought Egbuka would open the year as their 3rd wide receiver. But like you said, everything has been positive. It's been one of the most positive training camps I can remember for a rookie wide receiver, regardless of where that receiver was drafted. And again, when you look at some of the names going just after him, it's hard for me to mount a serious case and say, yes, here is why I would absolutely take this player over Egbuka.
Yeah. Egbuka steps into a really good offense. It seems like they're designing plays for him. They're trying to do things that are sustainable beyond Godwin's return. And, Godwin may return, but he may not be at full capacity all season long. Yeah, I think, keep in mind, they re-signed Godwin in this offseason, and that's great news. That means they believe in him in the long run, but it also is some succession planning here too, if you think about it. It's not just for this year that they made that signing. They did it for the next 3 years. So you don't just snap a finger and say, okay, Godwin's back. He's 100% just like he used to be, and he'll be that way the rest of the year. I think he's going to be managed. And Jalen McMillan's also out. I think that augurs in favor of Egbuka for sure. I think all these things work in Ibuka's favor. I think he's one of those sustainable helium guys, and I'm in on it.
All right, I'll throw you another receiver in just a moment, but we are also brought to you by Fantasy Sports Knockout, where a fantasy league meets a knockout pool, an innovative take on fantasy football. The concept is pretty simple. Choose a new fantasy lineup each week and score points the same way you would in any fantasy league, but you must choose your players wisely. You can only use each player once. The lowest weekly score or group of scores is eliminated from the contest every week. The concept may be simple, but survival is not. How will you play? Load up early or play the matchups and save the better players for later? Fantasy Sports Knockout. Can you survive the fantasy? Sign up at play.fantasysportsknockout.com today. All right, Jeff, sticking with the wide receiver position, we're heading over to Green Bay, Wisconsin. Matthew Golden, a guy who a month ago, you're getting around pick 100, often closer to pick 110. At the NFFC now, Jeff, we're talking inside the top 80, going around pick 75. Now, so much of this, of course, is tethered to Jaden Reed's injury, some of the other injuries in that wide receiver core, but Golden's had a nice camp. Are you paying that price on Matthew Golden?
No, probably not. I still have him at the old price. I have him at 106 in my latest set of rankings. I can see why he'd be considered a pivot for, are you trying to avoid Rashee Rice, Khalil Shakir, Jaden Reed, that sort of class. The range of other receivers in that area, all that have their flies attached to them. Hey, I've got Matthew Golden here. He can save me from that. I'm not so sure for a couple reasons. One, I don't think the Packers are a volume team. I think they still want to run the ball like crazy. I'm all in on Josh Jacobs. I'm not so sure I'm all in on any of the pass catchers. I'm kind of in on Golden if at the old price. I'm in on Tucker Kraft at the old price. Some of these reasons, like Jaden Reed's injury, I don't think that lasts forever. If it does, then yes, of course, then I'm probably wrong about Golden. But I think he's back at some point in time. And when that happens, you're talking, 6-7 targets in a given game? I don't see Golden or any other wide receiver being a 8 to 10 target per game sort of guy.
No Packers player had more than 76 targets last season. And there are reasons for that. Jordan Love missing time, the Packers basically running like the Navy offense for a couple of games with Malik Willis, Jaden Reed, not Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs missing time. Like Doubs had 72 targets in 13 games. He would have been the leader. But either way, this isn't one of those like 140 targets or even 120 target type of offenses. And I think ideally they want it to maybe be closer to that, because I think Green Bay veered too far toward leaning into the run last year, where it got to the point where you can't win against good teams when you're throwing the ball like 22 times per game. It works when the schedule softens up like it did over the second half of the year. So I think they do need to strike more of a balance. But to your point, I don't know if Matthew Golden is that guy. Like, he wasn't this target hog by any means at Texas. I think he's still a little bit more of a gadgety player early in his career. I still am holding out hope for Jayden Reed. I actually thought about going in that direction because I think these two are kind of tethered. Like, is there a world in which you can draft Matthew Golden at 78 and then also say, yeah, I like Jayden Reed at 110? Like, do those guys work against each other to you?
They kind of do. I mean, you really don't want to have two shares of the Packers wide receiver core. You just because, again, volume. I mean,
Right.
Here and added on the fact that Jordan Love had that torn ligament in his left thumb, his non-throwing thumb, which may not matter. It's definitely not his throwing hand. He'll probably be ready for week 1, but that's just fewer reps, less time to work together, less time to kind of build that timing. I just, there's enough there to worry me that it could be wrong. I mean, going into the season, I was pretty bullish on the Packers. I feel like they're one of those teams, one of the good teams that had a bad training camp, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I'm not even saying like you draft both Reed and Golden. I'm just saying, like, if you're coming up with rankings or just takes, like, can you be high on both? It's like, can both of them have an above average type of season? Because I feel like for Matthew Golden to justify a top 75 pick, like you almost need Jayden Reed to either take a step back or miss time to begin the season. So that's a long-winded way of saying I have no idea what's going to happen with the Packers receivers. And I think it's most likely that we end up kind of in the same position as last year, where one week maybe it's Dontavian Wicks and the next week it's Jayden Reed, but there's not going to be a lot of bankable consistency there.
Exactly right. Nick, I got another receiver for you.
All right.
Ricky Pearsall. I know you love Ricky Pearsall.
I do.
He was wide receiver 42 from the middle of May to July 1st. He was around pick 92. Right now, you're having to pay around pick 65 or so. He's wide receiver 33. Quite a bit. It's a 2-round jump. We know the reasons why he's gone up.
Yep.
Are you in on the new price?
Yeah, I mean, it's getting to the point where you don't feel great about it, knowing that, had you bought earlier, you would be getting some nice CLV here. But no, I think it's still fair. We're talking about a guy who has kind of fallen into, and in partially earned, but partially fallen into being the number 1 wide receiver for what might be one of the best offenses with the best schedule in the NFL this season, right? I think just being the number 1 receiver for the 49ers is meaningful. And, we'll see how long he holds that. There's been some level of optimism for Juwan Jennings. We'll see what's going on with the calf. We'll see how much time Brandon Ayuk misses. But as long as Ricky Pearsall stays healthy, I think he will justify this cost. And, again, he's going in that same range of wide receivers that we talked about going behind Emeka Egbuka. Like, I like Pearsall over Judy. Pearsall versus Roma Dunze, I still think I'm leaning Pearsall there. There's enough questions as far as, how the targets are going to break down in Chicago, whether or not Caleb Williams actually takes a huge step forward. I'm absolutely taking him over Travis Hunter, Chris Olave. It pains me to say it, but Jacoby Meyers, Deebo Samuel, Stephon Diggs, so when you look at it that way, I think it is pretty justified. I guess the big question is, 1, can he stay healthy? 2, we're talking about 2 good games at the end of last season that's kind of buoying this. And again, people dropping like flies around him in that wide receiving core, I think is a big part of the reason that we feel the way we do about Ricky Pearsall. At the same time, he was a first-round pick. Like, this is kind of what you expect when you draft a receiver in round 1, the kind of trajectory that you would want them to take. So, no, again, it's a little uncomfortable, but I don't think it's an overpay. We're still talking wide receiver 33 for a guy who could be the number 2 target, number 2.5 target if you're counting Christian McCaffrey in that offense. Indeed.
And you just look at the attrition rate. We talked about Jennings briefly there. We talked about, not going to have Ayuk until week 6, not going to have maybe Cowing, some other guys that they had to trade for Sky Moore just so they could field enough receivers. that I think that speaks volumes. The Niners, it's not quite the training camp from hell they had last year, but it hasn't been good either. They've had a lot of injuries.
Yeah. Every year this happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we're gonna stick with wide receiver here, Jeff. We're on a run. I am going to give you Xavier Worthy for the Kansas City Chiefs. Not a massive riser, but we've seen him, push up about a half a round, maybe a little bit more than that over the last month. And of course, a decent amount of that is in reaction to the Rashee Rice news. But regardless, are you paying the price on Xavier Worthy going around pick 40?
Okay, so yes, but I haven't, if that makes sense.
Kind of makes sense.
I'm a gigantic hypocrite is basically what I'm telling you. But I did a podcast with Chris Harris, and we did talk about swing players. I don't know if Xavier Worthy is going to be that great of a player. It's an opportunity analysis situation here. I still don't know how good he is at gaining separation on like mid-tier routes. Can he be anything more than a gimmick and long play guy? Can he get that? They're going to have to find that out this year. I mean, it's definitely going to be on the tables. Like, you better find out if he can do that, because Rashee Rice will be suspended at some point this season. And the fact that it's going to happen now mid-season, I think benefits Worthy. It's just early on, it's harder to tell unless they kind of broker some sort of deal, which is still possible. But, that hearing's not until after week 4, until September 30th. It may take a week after the hearing to come down with a ruling, but we're still looking at some semblance of a suspension. It's not whether or not Rashee Rice will be suspended. It's the length of suspension that we're dickering over. And I think the NFL came down pretty hard on their initial ruling, and hence the appeal. It's not like, can I get it down to 1 to 2 games? That's not on the table either. We're talking minimum 3 and probably a lot more than that, given what happened compared his case versus Jordan Addison. So that all points to a big chance for Worthy. And the Chiefs with a better offensive line this year, theoretically, more time for Patrick Mahomes and more time for Worthy's routes to kind of develop. I'm in. I mean, I look at the prices, the relative prices. We got, McLaurin ended his hold in. He's probably going to leapfrog Worthy in terms of price now, I would guess. But DJ Moore, Cortland Sutton, DK Metcalf, I'm in that. He's in that range for me. He's not necessarily above or below those guys for me. They're all kind of, and yeah, I will have to make a decision every time on that. So far, I haven't clicked on that. I have clicked on DK once. I think maybe I have one Sutton share. I definitely have DJ Moore ahead of those guys. That to me is the one difference is I'm ahead of ADP on DJ Moore. So I end up getting DJ Moore instead of Worthy in many cases so far. But if all it takes is one other person I like more for me to have Worthy as a pivot, or just maybe a running back start, and then I need wide receivers.
All right, what do you got for me next?
All right, I got one quarterback one for you here.
Okay.
I think you're in on this too. Dak Prescott is now a tier 2 quarterback. He is going up like 30 picks higher than he was earlier in draft season. No longer can you get Dak Prescott at QB 14, QB 13, QB 15. He's now QB 9, sometimes QB 8. Yep. Sometimes he goes ahead of Bo Nix. Sometimes he goes ahead of Baker Mayfield. It's kind of at the point where you said before earlier, and I know I've said earlier, that I don't really want to draft quarterbacks. And yet I really like Dak this year. I really like that George Pickens was added to this roster. I like that the defense kind of projects to be a dumpster fire. I think all these things kind of augur well for us. I want a lot of Dak. Are you going to pay that new price, though?
Yeah. I mean, if I'm waiting on quarterback, I think that's still a range I'm totally comfortable with. You and I, we've been on Dak for a while here. I never really understood why he was, going for a while, like well after Goff and Murray and even Brock Purdy. People were taking Caleb Williams over him. And I think the market has corrected, right? Like no matter what ADP you're looking at, we've seen a pretty steady rise for Dak Prescott over the last month or two. I will say I've seen him go ahead of Mahomes in a couple of drafts. I don't know if I go quite that far, because even like these down years for Patrick Mahomes, he's still like a totally fine fantasy quarterback. He's not elite. If you're taking him as your 4th or 5th quarterback, you're going to be disappointed. But if you're getting him as QB 7 or 8, you're still fine there. I mean, Dak Prescott, ceiling wise, has proven that he's in that category, right? I mean, he's been a top 3 player at his position, I think twice in the last few years. Basically, when he's stayed healthy, he's been in that mix. 2 years removed from throwing for over 4,500 yards. He's right up near the top of the league in terms of yards, in terms of pass attempts. And yeah, you could say Dallas has turned over its coaching staff since then. A lot of those guys, especially the offensive line, have turned over. But exactly what you said, like the fact that this defense, I don't think is going to be that good. The fact that they don't really have a running game, that's bad for the Cowboys in real life. And that is great for Dak Prescott and great for the Cowboys receiving core in fantasy. So I'm in on Dak. I'm in on CeeDee Lamb. I'm in on George Pickens. To a degree on Javonte Williams. If he falls far enough, you're like, whatever, I guess I'll just take a starting running back in the NFL. I don't expect to get much out of that. But yeah, we're still talking post pick 90 on average for Dak Prescott. And he is one of the few quarterbacks that I would really actually target. Like when I'm waiting on quarterback, because part of the strategy behind that is there are so many guys that feel similar. It's him and Justin Fields are kind of the two guys that I want. And Fields has actually been a faller, by the way, partially because of how bad he's looked in the preseason. I still think there's going to be a really nice rushing floor with Fields. I'm not that concerned about what I saw in the preseason, but yes, I will take Dak Prescott in the 90s. I have no problem with that whatsoever. I think this is a rare like ceiling play that you could still get as your QB 9 or 10 in any draft.
Right. And I will play extreme weight on the quarterback at times. And if so, that costs me Dak, so be it. I won't be renaming my franchises Baby Got Dak or anything like that,
God.
but
don't even get me started.
Yeah. I hate funny team names.
I know. Maybe I'm a hater. Maybe I'm a loser. I'm Team Whalen, or Team Ron Dane, whatever it may be.
I'll go Icky Shuffle, but that's just, I came up one name and that's what I use every single time. Yes. So it's simple. But it does tell you if you want a Bengal, you're going to have to draft him early, but defense not included. But that is one thing there. So you got anything more for me? Any more before we hit out here?
Yeah, I want to get to at least one more here because it is a Cincinnati Bengal and not necessarily somebody that I would have expected to rise in the way that he has. Like I'm mostly on board with it, but we're talking about, now creeping into the middle of the second round, if not early second round, Chase Brown up to about pick 17 on average at the NFFC. Go back a month or so, he was in that, late second round discussion, kind of right there with Irving, Taylor, Jacobs, Kyron Williams. And, he's not necessarily on his own tier by any means. You'll still see some of those other backs go ahead of him. But on average, he's going 3 to 6 picks ahead of that group now. So are you paying the updated price on Chase Brown?
I kind of am, but it's weird in how I do it. Like I have Josh Jacobs and Jonathan Taylor ahead of Chase Brown, but I have Devon Achane and Bucky Irving behind Chase Brown. Okay. So I have him at 18. I'll take him. So 17, 18, that seems about right for me. I'll take him. I know at one point in time you could reliably get him in the third round. That time is long gone. Remember when we had Jeff Hobson on Sirius XM Fantasy, when we previewed the Bengals, he writes for Bengals.com, talked about how the team previously didn't have plays designed for Chase Brown. Now they do. Now that, you hear all the talk from Dan Pitcher, the offensive coordinator, Zach Taylor calls a lot of plays, but they design the plays together. This is an offense that is built in part to highlight Chase Brown's talents. So yes, I'm in on Chase Brown.
Okay, there we have it. I still think I have him kind of right in the thick of that previous group. And part of it is rooted in this idea that can the Bengals offense sustain the number one receiver, another top 30 receiver, and an elite running back? Like how many passes is he going to have to catch to pay that off? I guess I don't see him like exceeding that ADP, if that makes sense, because it would have to come at the expense of one of those other players. Like, or I guess can the Bengals offense just be that good? Like, are we looking at are we looking at greatest show on turf where you got Bruce and Holt and Marshall Faulk all eating?
I kind of think they are close to that level. Very
it's the
close
closest
to
we've
that
seen,
level.
Probably. I'm sure there are other examples, but it's in that category. Yeah.
Right. And it's tough for me to step away from this, Nick, and look at it dispassionately. So I will say that I'm concerned about right guard. That is the one disaster position in the Bengals offense. And if Myles Garrett breaks through right there and makes life hell on Joe Burrow because of that, then I'm going to be very angry because it's preventable error. That said, I just think they're going to be in a lot of shootouts this year. And I think there's enough to go around. I think another 40 touchdown pass season from Joe Burrow is in play. And Brown will get some of those out of the backfield. There'll be other touchdowns on the ground as well. I do think the yardage will be crazy there. I really do.
Yeah. No, that's fair. It's conceivable. And the fact that it even is conceivable, I think just speaks to the talent level in that Bengals offense. I mean, Chase Brown, you look at before he sat out week 18, correct? Mm-hmm. Last year. Yeah. I mean, prior to that, 27 22, 19, 19, 24, 26, 14, 13 fantasy points over like an 8-game run. I mean, there is somewhat of a blueprint for this working. And I will say the other team, we mentioned the greatest show on turf, Rams. The other one that comes to mind, Jeff, the 2012 Jaguars, Cecil Shorts, Justin Blackmon, Maurice Jones-Drew. I think that I would put that in the same category.
Yeah. Yes. Cecil Shorts. Haven't mentioned that name in a while. Like hearing it there.
Yeah, that was a 2-14 Jags team under the great Mike Mularkey.
Alas, that could be, that might have something to do with the defense there a little bit there, but and the defense is just going to be hideous. It's just going to be so bad again. Yeah. Dallas and Cincinnati are inexorably linked. They operate the same way. Dallas Jerry has a lot more money than Mike Brown does, but they operate very similarly, including alienating their stars for reasons. I don't know, but they also have really bad defenses, both.
Yep. All right. Any other players you want to throw my way, or are we good here?
We're good here.
Right.
I think we've talked about most of these guys ad infinitum. I think we're just ready for the season to start. Next week, we'll be talking about week 1 matchups. Excited about that. Ready to jump in and all that. Ready to talk some shop for that way.
Yeah, we'll be coming to you every Tuesday throughout the NFL season, giving you everything you need once the season actually arrives. We'll have 7 episodes a week on this feed. We'll also be doing the sports gambling show, the NFL gambling pod, myself and John McKechnie. You could catch that in the feed. You could catch it along with all of our podcasts over on the RotoWire YouTube channel. Want to thank Circa. Want to thank Renegade Fantasy. Want to thank Fantasy Sports Knockout. Check out all those. You can find the links in the description to the episode. Jeff, I will talk to you on SiriusXM this week, and very much looking forward to getting back to this with you, I should say, in advance of week 1 next week.
Indeed. And tomorrow we got Chris Liss on the show. We're going to review the RotoWire Stake League auction, and we'll talk auction tips. If you are getting into an auction, by the way, check out the RotoWire Draft Assistant. Use promo code YouTube15 to get 15% off any RotoWire subscription. But use the Draft Assistant, including the live sync option there. Put in your league under my leagues. Use live sync to update your draft as it's ongoing. Can't tell you how much time it saves. Tomorrow, I am doing a Yahoo auction and an ESPN draft at the same time. I would be helpless without live sync. It's going to be so huge for me there. So can't emphasize that enough. YouTube 15 is the promo code, 15% off any RotoWire subscription.
You said it, man. You see it right there on your screen. YouTube 15, put it in at rotowire.com, 15% off. We'll leave you on that. We'll talk to you next Tuesday.